So allow me to introduce our second panelist, and by the name of Dr. Jeffrey Mrizek. The title of her dissertation is Assessing Collective Impact for the Emergence of a Competency-Based Statewide Public-to-Public Civil Service Career Pathway. He is the recipient of the award for graduation with distinction. Let's give him a hand.
Good evening. Thank you for spending your evening with us. I'm excited, right, to be able to present my dissertation. To those who are in the journey now, this is a bright and shiny moment, I get it. And I just want to say to you, I understand the dark moments and the despair. So persevere, okay? The rewards, I can't explain this last year how much my life has transformed from graduating this program. Am I moving forward? Okay, outstanding. That's me. My study is a phenomenology. What I looked at specifically was a phenomenon known as collective impact, which is a large group intervention designed basically for collaborating across systems and system alignment. And specifically what I was looking at was something we call another phenomenon known as, you may have heard, the silver tsunami. And it's a demographic trend that kind of runs across the United States in terms of the workforce and how that workforce is structured mostly by demographic of age. And so what you have is folks known as baby boomers who are predominantly coming into retirement eligibilities based on our pension plans and things like that. So I worked at the time when I was a student at the Franchise Tax Board, and my job was the professional development or the instructional officer for that department. And we knew a succession planning issue was at hand. And I wanted my dissertation to be tangible because we talk about praxis in our program. We say, okay, we want to do research, but we don't want it to be super just theoretical out there. We want it to actually have a policy impact. So I chose to look at how is the community college system of 113 colleges, 72 districts across the state, meeting the needs of the diverse departments and agencies that are publicly funded at the state of California. There's over 100 different agencies, boards, and other types of departments. And what we saw was I had the opportunity to work at the California Department of Human Resources for a little while as a consultant. And I worked about 8-10 months there and did a field study. And what we learned from the data that was available from CalHR, that about 43%, almost half of the workforce, is retirement eligible. Well, what's the workforce of the state of California? It's over 200,000. So you're talking about 100,000 potential vacancies that are coming up, and we're still in the midst of this next year, 2018. So I wanted to look and say, was there any kind of collective impact specifically, any kind of action going on to try to come up with some solutions around this succession and recruitment issue? And the short answer was no. It's not actually intentionally being designed in that way. The community college system tends to be more aware of collective impact, and the findings were that the state wasn't as much aware of collective impact as a process. Why is it significant, or what does it matter? It matters because if 100,000 people stop working tomorrow, then all that knowledge transfer and all that information of how the state works and how the state functions, which is complex, human services, DMV, tax collection, on and on and on, public safety, right? So you're talking about organizations becoming at risk for operational excellence, not being able to operate well. So how do we backfill ready workforce, readiness, whatever readiness is, right? And so we tried to explore the concept of readiness in terms of the workforce. There's words in here that are academic words, like academic learning outcomes emerge into a synergistic dialectic of interlocutors of leaders and administrators and educators and students. So it's a systemic thing. This image here is trying to show that there's multiple systems, there's dynamics, and there's politics going on and all of that. My method, again, was just to look at collective impact from a phenomenological perspective, and I developed a framework which I named a systems view of the interrelations of the meanings of competency, readiness. So I did the literature review. These are some of the major theories and policies that we looked at, and then the theoretical framework that I explored. So this is a symbolic presentation of the theoretical framework. And so what I did is it's a multi-dimensional kind of, it's a three-layer cake is what it is. I looked at the student level, I looked at the institutional level, and then I looked at the state level high. So there was 3 levels of exploration. And each of the research questions looked at a different level. So research question 1 looked at the state policy and federal policy level. Research question 2 looked at the system level, community colleges, K-12 systems. And then the micro level asked about students, what they felt in terms of their soft skills, their employability skills. So this represents a boundary. Oops, I'm sorry. There's a boundary here that you see. So these things are inside the person, their personality, the learned beliefs, their needs. Those are internal things to an individual. That boundary that's dashed represents those things that are external, which are systemic outside of the individual. So the research question, I'll just focus on one because this is a very big study. Okay, I'm just going to look at meso level, which is your middle level. And according to the CSI project, which was that CalHR work, on the higher education partnership, what was the relationship between career readiness, competency or competencies, and the development of 21st century skills, and how is this relation mitigated displayed through transformative scenario planning? So what I did was say, okay, what are the skills and how will we learn? So I actually convened what's called the transformative scenario planning session, where I brought together higher education partners, K-12 partners, the different representatives from various departments together. And then as they dialogued and convened around the research questions and the methodology of a transformational scenario planning, the findings were then captured and recorded, and then we were able to thematically assess what we can do about those outputs or findings. So here's what we learned, or here's what I learned. Basically, collective impact has not intentionally bilaterally been engaged, and it may or may not necessarily be the right. What I've also learned is it may not necessarily be the right form either, because sometimes politics or policy or legislative approaches might be more appropriate than just simply doing collaborative collective impact. 2, support exists for multiple interrelations of meanings, so there's many meanings of competency, and so when you say competency, you think someone knows what you're meaning, but they might have a totally different conception in their mind. So it becomes very difficult when you're trying to have conversations across systems and then having multiple meanings of the word competency and what is that. And we found that data is emergent as a reciprocal intersubjective meaning. So data is data. It's a number, right? It's very logical on what it is, and that makes it easier to translate through systems. So having common data sets, which we see some of that activity in the real world with WIOA, which is the Workforce Investment Opportunity Act from the federal government, saying these are some of the measures we can do in terms of career technical education. We found that there is a shared meaning of readiness through competency assessments. So if you could measure competency by an assessment and everyone had a common assessment, you then have a common meaning of competency. And then significant relationships that students do in fact have an interest in going to civil service career. Because it's important to know, right? We have 2.1 million students in the system, and if none of them are interested in civil service, then this is a really lousy study. But we did find that they were interested, which supports the validity and the significance. Students would like to work for civil service. Helping them find the path is what's important. What you see here is a bunch of lines and drawings, but basically on this side are the 5 conditions of collective impact, which are common agenda, shared measurement, mutually enforced activities, continuous communication, and the backbone organization. And then on the other side is the meanings of competency as behavior, as trait or attribute, something internal, as curriculum, because the curriculum can define what competency is, and as well as policy. And these alignments show how the themes came out when I did the analysis. So after looking at the analysis, I ended up coming up with this construct, which is basically a general model of competency-based career pathways as an intersubjective construct. What you see here is, again, the 5 conditions. And then I showed you those 5 attributes: policy, curriculum, traits, and behavior. So this is showing how, at what stage these information pieces come in and how they align together. And the whole point of the study, one of the big findings was this assessment data is really key. And so we see some of the data movements even today with like community college systems using Launchboard and things like that to help clarify data-driven outcomes. Finally, in looking at where do we go from here? So now we know collective impact can help align competency-based pathways. Where do we go from there? And so my future research recommendations is to look at how you can do competency-based public-to-public career pathways. And I did this a structural coupling model. And what you see here is that there are actually two strategies for meeting the needs of this workforce demand. You have an in strategy, which is a recruitment strategy, bringing the community college system to bear as new recruits, as well as an up strategy because you have an existing workforce that's staying behind. Those people also need to be developed and brought up. So we looked at competency-based talent management and work-based learning opportunities as part of the up, and then competency-based curriculum. Aligning those two then created pathways because students could get the curriculum that mapped to the readiness that the state identified as policy. So this was praxis. It actually happened. So in December of last year, the governance, the state of California that's over, it's called GovOps or Government Operations Agency, adopted the 21st century skills, the new world of work. And those skills now are considered the foundational core competencies for all state employees. And what's neat about this is when you talk about system alignment, 113 colleges are now getting scaled up for New World of Work to be either contextualized or taught standalone these skills. Those skills ready all students for work in the civil service workforce at the entry level. And then subsequent work on that competency model is we didn't just stop it at the entry level. We've scaled it to 5 stackable kind of progression or ladder development. So you start at that entry level and you can end up all the way through professional development at that expert level. So that's pretty much where my study is. And one thing I'd like to share is that this is truly about praxis. If you take your study and you work on a real world problem, you can solve real world problems. At this point, subsequent to graduation, I was recruited and hired by the California Community College Chancellor's Office, and I work at the Workforce and Economic Development Division. And in that work, I've been able to be very successful in devising various pathways. We do it for accountants. We have the New World of Work pathway, CNAs, and now we're even getting into how do we use apprenticeships and apprenticeship formats to recruit these processes. So we continue to use data, the workforce data, identify the needs, and then we look to this models that were formed on how to inform these pathways and actually tangibly bolt them to the ground and make real-world impacts for students in the community college to find ways to find career paths into civil service. And so as of late, we're working with the government engaging youth, which is a nonprofit, and we're trying to bring this not just at the state level, but to our local governments and to our boards and also to nonprofits so we continue to see it actually be real.